I'm not usually one to share stories like this, but a few months ago, something happened that I just can't shake. I live in a quiet town near a small forested lake where my cabin sits right on the water's edge. It's the kind of place people dream of retiring to, peaceful, serene, and far from the chaos of city life. I'm a retired educator, and my days are spent fishing, fixing up the cabin, or sitting by the lake, watching the stars. It was an idyllic life, until that night when everything changed. It started like any other evening. The lake was still, the stars were clear, and the only sound was the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface. I've always loved stargazing. The sky here is perfect for it. But on this particular night, something caught my eye, a light, hovering just above the lake. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe the moon playing tricks on me. But this light wasn't behaving like a reflection. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, like it was searching for something. My first thought was maybe it was a plane, but it was too low, too quiet. No sound at all, actually. It didn't make any sense. The light kept getting closer, and I couldn't take my eyes off it. That's when I saw it. This strange glowing object hovering just above the water in the middle of the lake. It was too big to be a drone, too smooth and metallic to be anything man-made. I grabbed my binoculars, trying to get a better look, and that's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This thing, it wasn't just some odd light, it was a craft, egg-shaped, metallic, with a faint glow surrounding it. I sat there, frozen, watching it hover in place as if it were observing something, and that's when I knew. I wasn't alone. I don't know what came over me that night. Any sensible person would have probably gone inside, locked the doors, and called the police, or at least tried to ignore what they saw. But something about that craft, hovering so silently over the lake, pulled me in. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my old boots, and headed down to the shore. The air felt strange as I approached the water, like it was charged with static electricity. You know that feeling before a thunderstorm, when everything goes quiet, and you can almost taste the tension in the air? That's what it was like. Even the usual sounds of nature, crickets, the gentle lapping of the water, the occasional owl, had disappeared. It was dead silent, and that silence was unnerving in a way I can't fully describe. I hesitated for a moment, standing there on the edge of the dock. The object was just sitting there, maybe 200 feet out, perfectly still. It didn't seem to notice me, or if it did, it didn't care. I felt like I was trespassing on something that wasn't meant for human eyes. But my curiosity got the better of me. I unhooked my little rowboat from the dock, careful not to make a sound, and pushed off into the lake. Rowing toward the craft was surreal. The closer I got, the more I could feel this strange pressure in my chest, almost like the air was pushing back against me. The lake, usually calm and reflective like glass at night, had a strange ripple spreading from the center where the object hovered. The water wasn't disturbed by the wind or movement, but it rippled gently, like the object was somehow influencing the surface tension of the lake itself. As I got closer, maybe 50 feet away, I finally got a good look at it. The thing was smooth, almost too smooth, like it had been molded from one single piece of metal. It was hard to tell what material it was made of, but it had this dull glow, as if it was absorbing the moonlight rather than reflecting it. No seams, no rivets, no visible propulsion system. It was completely alien, in the truest sense of the word. Whatever it wasn't from here. I stopped rowing for a moment, letting the boat drift in the water, just taking it all in. That's when the strange humming started. It wasn't loud, not at all, but it vibrated through the air and through my bones. It was a low-frequency sound, like something I could feel more than hear. My flashlight flickered, and the air felt thicker, heavier. I almost turned back. Something deep inside me was telling me to go back, to leave this thing alone, but I kept going. I couldn't stop myself. I rowed a little closer, maybe 20 feet away now, close enough to see details on the surface of the craft. There were these faint, glowing symbols along the side, like nothing I'd ever seen before. They weren't letters or numbers, but they looked deliberate, like a language, something too complex for me to understand. I leaned forward, straining to get a better look, when suddenly, without warning, a section of the craft's side started to open. Not like a door or a hatch you'd expect, but the metal itself seemed to melt away, forming an opening. At that moment, I froze. My hands locked onto the oars, and my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. All I could do was stare at that dark opening, wondering what the hell was about to come out of it. And then, they stepped out. Two figures emerged from the opening in the craft, and to this day, I still have trouble describing exactly what they looked like. They weren't like the grays people talk about in most abduction stories. These beings were taller, almost as tall as a full-grown human, but slimmer, with a grace in their movement that felt completely unnatural, like they were moving in slow motion, even though everything was happening at normal speed. Their skin, or at least what I thought was their skin, was pale, almost translucent, with a faint shimmer to it, like it was reflecting the light from the moon and the craft itself. They didn't have the exaggerated features you might expect. No oversized heads or bulbous black eyes. Instead, their faces were smooth, almost featureless. They had eyes, yes. Large, dark, and completely emotionless. But no mouths, no nose, nothing that would resemble a human face aside from those haunting eyes. I remember gripping the oars so hard that my knuckles turned white. I didn't dare move. I didn't even breathe, afraid that any sound or movement might provoke them. But they didn't seem to notice me at first. They just stood there, at the edge of the craft, hovering just above the surface of the water. That's right. They weren't standing on the boat or the lake. They were somehow suspended above it, like the laws of physics didn't apply to them. And then one of them turned toward me, slowly, deliberately. I'll never forget that moment, the feeling that washed over me when those dark eyes locked onto mine. It was like my mind was being pried open, invaded by something far beyond my understanding. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I felt was this overwhelming sensation of being examined. Like every thought, every memory, every emotion I had was laid bare in front of them. It wasn't just fear that I felt, though there was plenty of that. There was something deeper, something primal, an understanding that these beings were far older, far more advanced than anything I could comprehend. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that this wasn't happening. Maybe it was some elaborate prank, some kind of dream. But deep down, I knew. This was real, and it was happening right in front of me. One of the beings extended its hand, or at least what I assumed was a hand. It was long, with thin fingers, and it moved with an elegance that didn't match its unnerving appearance. The gesture wasn't threatening, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was almost like they were offering something. Or maybe they were asking for something. I couldn't tell. I just sat there, paralyzed, watching as it reached out toward me. And then, without a single word or sound, images started flashing in my mind. Rapid, vivid bursts that I couldn't control. I saw distant worlds, strange landscapes bathed in alien colors. I saw towering structures made of materials I didn't recognize. I saw beings like them, traveling through vast, endless spaces. And then, the images shifted. Flashes of Earth, but not as it is now. Cities crumbled, landscapes scarred and broken. There was a sense of loss, of warning, almost like they were trying to tell me something urgent. I wanted to speak, to ask them what it all meant, but I couldn't. My throat was dry and my mind felt foggy, overloaded with all the information they were pushing into my head. It was like they were communicating, but not with words, not even with thoughts. It was something else, something deeper, more instinctual. I couldn't understand all of it, but I could feel their emotions. Sadness, desperation, a need for something they couldn't find. Maybe they were explorers or refugees, or maybe they were something far more dangerous. Before I could make sense of it, the connection broke. The images stopped, and I was left sitting there in my boat, shaking, with the two figures still hovering silently above the lake. They didn't move. They didn't react. They just watched. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they turned back toward the craft. The opening in the side closed behind them, the surface of the craft rippling as if it had never opened in the first place. The humming sound grew louder for a moment, and the air around me seemed to buzz with electricity. My boat rocked gently in the water, and before I could even think to react, the craft lifted off, silently, effortlessly, rising up into the night sky until it was nothing more than a faint light blending in with the stars. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring up at the empty sky, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But there was no making sense of it. Not then, not ever. For a long time I just sat there, floating in the middle of the lake, too stunned to move. The sky was clear again, the stars twinkling as if nothing had happened. It almost felt like the whole encounter had been a dream, but the buzzing in the air still lingered, a reminder that it had been all too real. Eventually I rowed back to shore, though I barely remembered doing it. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the flashes of images and emotions they'd shown me. Were they trying to communicate with me? Warn me? Why me, of all people? What did they want? The questions faded, replaced by a growing sense of dread. As I docked the boat and returned to the cabin, I felt I wasn't alone anymore, both physically and mentally. The images replayed in my mind, echoing their emotions: sadness, urgency, loneliness. These beings didn't feel like invaders, but seemed to be searching or trying to warn us. What unsettled me was that the crumbling cities and scarred landscapes resembled Earth, not some alien world. I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't their first visit. That night, I stared at the fire, unable to sleep. The images of alien cities and Earth's devastation felt deeply personal, as if they had chosen me for a reason I didn't understand. Their fear troubled me, not of us, but of something bigger. I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe my tale of contact with beings from another world? The lake felt different, like something was still there, watching. I couldn't shake the feeling they hadn't left. The next morning, I rowed back to where the craft had hovered, needing proof it wasn't just a dream. But the lake was calm and quiet, as if nothing had happened. I searched for hours, hoping to find some sign that the encounter was real, but there was no physical evidence. I should have been relieved, but the lack of proof only deepened the mystery. How could something so real leave no trace? The questions haunted me, but I had no answers. Then strange things began happening around the house. My flashlight flickered with fresh batteries, my phone lost signal near the lake, and the air around the cabin seemed to hum at night. More unsettling were the vivid dreams of that night, dreams that felt more like memories. I'd see the craft and the glowing symbols, and the being's message became clearer, more urgent. The images of the alien cities and the devastated Earth replayed in my mind, and I felt more connected to them. When I woke up, the symbols were burned into my memory. Odd things appeared around the property too, symbols drawn in the sand that resembled those on the craft. I heard faint humming from the lake at night. I tried convincing myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew something had changed. I didn't dare tell anyone. When I mentioned strange lights to a friend, he laughed it off. People don't want to believe things like this. So I kept it to myself and grew more isolated, feeling disconnected from the world. Weeks passed, and I tried returning to my routine, but I wasn't the same. That night changed me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter wasn't over, that they weren't finished with me. As I sat on the porch staring at the lake, I began to accept that I might never understand what had happened. Maybe I wasn't meant to. I've thought about sending this story to you for a long time, wondering if anyone would believe me, if anyone could help me understand what really happened that night. I don't expect answers, but I need to share it. Maybe there are others out there like me, people who've experienced something they can't explain. Maybe if we share our stories, we can start to piece together the bigger picture. Because one thing I'm sure of now is that we're not alone. They're out there, watching, waiting, and for whatever reason they chose me. I just hope that whatever their message was about, we're ready for it. And that's another eerie encounter. What do you think happened on that lake? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit that like button and make sure to subscribe to Eerie Encounters so you never miss a new tale. Got your own story to share? Drop it in the comments or reach out. You might be featured next. Thanks for watching, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies.